Hey folks, yesterday I pushed to rank 1 softcore cycle ladder with Mage, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the strategies that will help you if you want to do an arena push, and also a little bit about the build I used. This is pretty much the same as my Immortal Frostclaw build with a few minor changes since the guide I did. Most fits the same, but we'll go into everything there. For a little bit of context, this is actually my first ever arena run. You can see from the start of the clip here, I began at wave 100 instead of some high amount because of the arena key. So there was some amount of mental fatigue getting to the end of it, but it was a good run nonetheless. And a lot of the different defensive mechanics I have in place played a huge role in keeping me alive. So let's jump into it. I'm going to assume that you've watched the Immortal Frostclaw guide. If you haven't, go check that out. I'm not going to repeat myself too much here. We're just going to mostly talk about some changes. So jumping into it, you'll notice the Runemaster passive tree is slightly different. One of the main things is that I maxed out the Sphere of Protection for a bit of extra DR. This is really important for pushing hard content. I also prioritize getting a little bit of cast speed here and move speed, as there's a lot of projectiles and stuff coming at you in arena, and it's pretty good to be able to dodge them with minimal delay in between your stutter stepping. Other than that, we took out a couple points of leech here because we did enough damage that we don't really need it. And that's what we used to max out the rest here. We had some points in here before and we took those out, and this is currently what we're sitting at. Mage tree is unchanged. And on to the gear. One thing that I think is extremely valuable that I don't have because I'm CoF and getting ladles is hard is actually chance to blind. Appears to be very, very high value in arena. A lot of the things that are actually hitting you are ranged, and blind goes a long way to help with that. If I had blind, it would be really nice. It'd make a big difference, but I don't. So if you are Merchant Guild, or if you're lucky enough to have a 4 LP or 3 LP and you can get blind, definitely go for that. Another thing that we've changed as a defensive layer is we've added some stun chance. In the arena run, a lot of times you can see the monsters sort of like getting stuck or like stuttering a little bit. And when they're charging at you, I feel like this does add a lot of value, these stun idols. And it also has some resist on it that can help round out some of the missing resist we have on our gear. The other idols are pretty much the same. There's not really much changed here. I have a bunch of armor, rounding out res, still the mana efficiency and all that stuff. So that's all the same. Necklace, this is probably not the best thing I could have, but I haven't found a better one, so we're still rocking that. Helmet is still the same. Another option is the Bone Clamor Barboot. I have one here. I'm still not sure which one is better. You lose a lot of crit chance with the Bone Clamor. I will equip it here. So you can see my crit chance 97 down to 54, but we gain a significant amount of armor. And we also gain int, which is ward retention, cast speed, all that other stuff. I'm still unsure though. And one thing that's nice about the prism is we actually have less elemental damage taken, and it seems like of the monsters in arena, a lot of the damage they deal is actually elemental. Some of the more deadly stuff, like the wolves that charge at you and do frost or fire breath or whatever, this helps with that. So I'm still okay with prismatic gaze. Maybe bone clamor's better. I'll leave that up to you. So other than that, we've also added the core of the mountain, and this is pretty difficult to get as CoF because it's a boss only drop, but if you are lucky enough to get this, it could be pretty nice. Otherwise, Static Shell is still good. Prism Wrap is potentially good because of the elemental damage reduction. Unstable Core is probably still acceptable. There's nothing wrong with any of those options. And the reason I went with core specifically is we get extra int from all attributes, which also gives us strength. So percent armor, it has an armor roll, all sorts of good stuff here. It's a pretty nice chest. And I found that while you're kiting monsters in arena, you don't often proc the damage immunity. And I found that this 3 seconds is actually really clutch when the enemies finally do catch up to you and hit you. You're now safe for 3 seconds, and this got me out of a lot of sticky situations during the run. So I do think that this is a pretty good chest option. Also for echoes, I've been running this in my High Corruption Echoes too. It feels pretty good. The rings are still the same. I think red ring is the best in slot for endgame. If you don't have it, there's still a few alternatives. Opal rings are great because they give you CDR. What else? The Fairboar set ring gives you a lot of armor, like 180 or something, and up to 18 int, so that's also strong. And other than that, yeah, there's a few options. Check out my cheat sheet that I will link in the description, going over some different alternatives for uniques. The belt, I still think Strand of Souls is the best. There's a few alternatives. I know one of the dodge belts is pretty popular, and it's easier to get high LP on it. I think it's like Wardtail or something, I forget the name, but anyway. Yeah. And for the relic, I still think Twisted Heart with int is good. Another option is actually +4 Frostclaw. I'll talk about that real quick. So one of the guys in the Discord who is also pushing really hard into Arena is running Frozen Malice, and the reason for that is because of the stun idols and also the blind. The auto-targeting makes sure that you're hitting things as they charge at you. So the Frozen Malice can actually be pretty good for making sure that you're always applying those ailments and the debuffs and the crowd control to the fast-moving enemies. The problem with this is the +3 means that you need about 26-ish levels of Frostclaw to sustain mana, so you need another 2 more points into here, and probably 27. It's just really hard to sustain your mana otherwise, as the cost applies to the base, which gets multiplied, so it is something to consider. You probably need to use Unstable Core and a +4, but there's a few other ways to move that around. So back to the gear. Another thing I've added is a Ravenous Void. This gives DR. There's also currently a bug where if you change servers, you go into settings and change servers and then change areas, it will actually stack up to 6. So 30% DR here. That was brought up by one of the viewers on my latest stream, so definitely huge thanks for that tip. The problem is if you ever proc the endurance threshold, so if you go below the endurance threshold, you'll lose the 6 stacks and it will never restack again to 6 until you change server, which you can't do while running Arena. So if you lose that, you ever go below endurance threshold, the bug will break and you'll lose 15% of your DR. For my 1300 run, I didn't actually use the Ravenous bug. So definitely not necessary, and even the Ravenous Void is not even necessary either. The only reason I'm using this is because I actually found this sooner than I found a T7 int Eternal Gauntlets. So I still think best in slot would be an Eternal Gauntlets with T7 int, sealed cast speed, and T5 experimental armor applies to damage over time mitigation. So that would probably be best in slot. Unfortunately, I just don't have RNG with finding Exalt, so here we are. I guess we'll just settle for an LP Ravenous Void. I'll take it. Yeah, the boots are still the same. I think Suffix, you probably want cooldown reduction. There's a lot of good stuff there, so yeah, that's another thing. And I think that's pretty much it for the build. I don't think I've changed anything else. I also have kept the Snap Freeze spec'd for Arena. I found that the panic button Snap Freeze actually came in super handy for a lot of dangerous situations where some fast-moving, high-damage enemies are charging at me. I just quickly pop the Snap Freeze or use it on elites so I can burst them down while they're frozen. Stuff like that. This definitely came in really handy. Another thing you could prioritize is despecking some of these other points, maybe freeze duration you don't need, or something like that. You can unspec some stuff, and then you can get armor on cooldowns. That'll give you a bit of extra armor, which is nice. Maybe you could get Creates Frozen Ground to add a little bit more crowd control, stuff like that. So a lot of good stuff in here. Another option is Flame Ward, but personally I do like Snap Freeze more. This is definitely up to preference though. And then Runic is pretty much unchanged. Flame Rush is also pretty much unchanged. I did unspec the Subjugation because I already had it from the passive tree anyway, and I wanted an extra point into the speed. There's some room to be flexible here, but yeah. Nova is also unchanged. It's not really much to talk here. You just make sure you have 0 mana cost and you're good to go. So let's jump into the arena itself and talk about some tips around that. So the first thing I'll talk about in arena is the difficulty can scale up pretty quickly. Early on, you'll probably find most of the stuff is very easy. and it's easy to be complacent. So definitely get yourself ready, get your like a cup of coffee or whatever before you jump into it, because it could be a pretty long run. This run from 100 wave to 1300 took me 4 hours. So if you're starting from a higher point, it probably won't take that long, but it also could take longer if it takes you longer to kill the enemies. So keep that in mind. You'll need a lot of free time. If you leave, you lose your progress. And that being said, we'll talk a little bit about the monsters. So in Arena, there are a lot of different monster types, but a few of the ones you see in Echoes appear to not be in Arena. So one example of a very deadly monster that's not in Arena is the Smoldering Lithrak. At least I didn't encounter it. Maybe it's possible, I don't know. But the most deadly enemies that I found were the very fast-moving ones that do damage over time. So one example is the Ice Breath Tiger, or the Fire Breath cat dog thing. So these things will charge at you, and it's very, very important that you have some way to deal with that. So either if you can dash away and kite them, or if you have some sort of like immunity mechanic. So like for me, if I have the Core of the Mountain immunity up, then you can use that. Or if you have some sort of like stun, but as you can see where I actually died at the end, I did stun the enemies, but they still continued attacking through the stun, which is what got me killed. So the crowd control is generally good, but you can't always rely it to completely mitigate damage. So definitely make sure you have some other defensive layers, and in general, kiting is always better. Avoiding the enemy's attacks is always better than trying to just beefcake your way through it. So do keep that in mind. Another thing regarding a lot of the enemy's attacks is many of them can just be sidestepped or stuttered stepped. So as you're moving around in the arena, I tend to move quite a lot, or at least for this run, I moved basically constantly. I would usually attack maybe once or twice, then move once or twice or move. And a lot of the things are shooting at where you currently are. So as long as you keep moving, many of the projectiles will actually miss. A lot of the enemy's attacks are also beams that are locked in place once they start attacking. So like the cold breath from the dogs, if you're running at them directly, you're going to walk right into the damage. But if you circle the enemies as you're fighting, like always just try and be running somewhat at an angle to any enemy you're fighting, and you'll usually avoid a very large amount of the damage. That also applies to the Immortal Eyes and their necrotic attacks. They shoot DOT beams and breath attacks. It does a huge amount of damage, but you can sidestep most of it. So also do that. Another enemy I found was pretty scary was actually the little snake shooter things, the blood spitter or something. They shoot little circles on the ground. It's a pretty fast projectile. If you are fighting them, make sure that you're not standing still too much, as the overlapping AoE can one-shot you if you make a mistake there. Another thing that's also potentially important depending on your build is in between waves, there's a bit of a delay, and ideally you want to maintain whatever ward you have as effectively as possible. So in my case, I just immediately go into the next round. I don't ever take a break in between rounds, as then I'll have a low ward value, and then I become vulnerable at the start of the round. So if you have, like, you're playing Frostclaw like I am, going into the round is your most vulnerable time, because you haven't had a chance to build up your ward yet, and that's when stuff can one-shot you through your like 3,000 or 4,000 ward before you get a chance. So definitely just try and rush into the next wave as quickly as possible, and also try and maintain as much ward. Like if you need to kite and get some of your buffs back up, like your Runic Invocation or your Flame Ward or whatever other defensive ability, if it'll help you get more EHP or whatever for your next engagement, then just take your time and do that. It's totally fine. You don't need to just go face first into everything. Just wait for your cooldowns. And yeah, I think those are kind of the main tips I have. I think The shrines can also be pretty useful too if you get some good ones, like stun or whatever can help you with crowd controlling the monsters. But in general, you can't really rely on the shrines for your arena push because they may not be there when you actually need them. So yeah, that's pretty much it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, found it informative, and yeah, thank you so much for watching. Cheers.